Hello, what's up? My name is Coral. Welcome back to my channel. Today, I have another trope video. Today, we're talking about fictional cults. So I have 4 books here that I've read, some kind of recently, some a little bit ago, and I'm gonna talk about them. Hopefully this is something you're interested in. If not, I'm not sure why you're here. I'm sorry. So the first book I have here is The Nightmare Girl by Jonathan Janz. This is a story about a kind of young family. They're at a gas station and they see a young woman and then the young woman's small son in a vehicle at a gas station, and the mother is the child starts crying and the mother just starts like hurting him. So they obviously, try to put a stop to it. And eventually the police get called. Eventually the child gets taken away from the mother. And it's then that the family starts getting harassed. And eventually they find out that the mother and her mother, so the mother and the grandmother, are linked to this cult in their small town, and the mother lights herself on fire and kills herself because her child's gotten taken away. And the people in the cult, they want this toddler back, and they're like willing to do some really bad stuff to get it back. So I thought this was an okay book. Let's see, the problem that I had with it was that the pacing was just kind of slow throughout the book. And while I do love a good quiet horror, I do love those slow burn books, this one was just a little bit too slow. What I did like is that I kind of go into the history of this cult. That was kind of interesting, how it's kind of been embedded in this small town. So it hits on that like small town with a secret thing. I also think that Jonathan Janz is really good at writing action sequences. There's a big part at the end of this book that was really great. It was just very well written. It was like, and I feel like I say this every time I review one of his books, but it was like watching an action movie. It was like reading an action movie, I guess. Like I don't know how he does it. It's just very cinematic with his action scenes. So definitely, if the premise sounds interesting, check it out and try it, because I know people who have really liked this. And that is the first book, The Nightmare Girl by Jonathan Janz. Next, I would like to tell you about Last Days by Adam Neville. This is such a big book. This is how many pages? Over 500. Let's see, 530. And this is about a cult called The Last Days. And the premise of this book is so interesting. It is a documentarian. He gets hired to do a documentary on this cult, which is no longer kind of together, because the leader of the cult like had her followers kill her and then kill each other and themselves. And this is something that happened, decades before this documentary is supposed to take place. But there are some survivors. There are people who got out of the cult before it culminated in this murder-suicide pact that they had. And there's also some members who were still members at the time of the end of the cult, but they were off doing other things, and so they weren't included in this suicide murder fiasco. So a lot of this is interviews with former members, interviews with like the police chief, people who interacted with The Last Days before the end of last days. And that part was super interesting to me. I really love like found footage movies. I really love documentaries about things. So this kind of, it really did that part super well. The documentarian, him and his partner, who is like the other camera guy, they start coming across some really spooky things while they're doing these interviews which are shot at locations where the cult had resided over the years that it was still a group. And some really spooky things start happening. They start to see things. They're not really sure if they're real. They're not really sure if it is just like residual spookiness, or like is there something corporal and physical after them. There were some really genuinely spooky parts in this book. I think Adam Neville, he really writes well. I think the thing that I didn't like about this was that there was a lot of lulls in it, and it was like something really, really good would happen, and then the pacing would just like drop off, and it's like, oh, it's a really lengthy book, which kind of surprises me with like how much of a plot about a guy who's making a documentary could, fit into over 500 pages. So I think it was part of it. It just took me a long time to read. And even though there were some really exciting parts, there were also some parts that were just like, So I don't know. I think that the ending was a little too long too. And it was like, I don't want to give the plot line away. I don't want to give the ending away, but they were at a location and it was just taking a little too long to wrap up for my liking. And the way it played out was pretty good, but like I said, there was just so many points where it was like, checking my watch, tick tock, like how long is this gonna take? I don't know. It was just, it was a little too long for me, which is such a bummer because the parts that were scary in this and like these kind of like these things that are happening to them as they're making their way through these interviews and these locations that they're at are really like scary and sinister. So it was kind of a bummer that the pacing just wasn't. And I mean, like, I don't need things to be constant bombarding horror, but I think it could have picked up the pace a little bit. So I would recommend this because the writing is good, because the idea is so interesting, because it is like the behind the scenes of a documentary, which is super cool. And there's in the beginning they're kind of talking about other films that this documentarian has done, and I'm like, man, I want to watch this film about the last days. I want to watch this one that he did, and that one that he did, and that one that he did. So if somebody can make this a movie, that would be really cool, and I'd love to watch it. I guess that's my point here, is like, somebody, please make this into a movie. I think it would translate really well into a film. Maybe some of the lulls that the book had wouldn't be so bad on the screen. I don't know. Definitely check this out. There were parts that like are too good to miss, I think. Next is another book that I've read really recently. This is Halcyon by Rio Yours, and I wouldn't say that this is straight up horror, but it's definitely a thriller, and it definitely gets dark. This is a story about a family. There is a father, a mother, two daughters. One's, in her like high school years, the other one's in maybe middle school. Shirley is the older daughter and Edith is the younger daughter, And Edith has this ability, they call it streaming, which really makes sense in how they explain it. I think streaming is like the perfect word for that, because what she's doing is like subconsciously she is streaming events that are happening around the country. I'm not sure if it is quite as widespread as like worldwide, but definitely not in her area. And this thing doesn't happen unless she's sleeping, so it's like her brain's kind of on like standby mode, and these things just come out, and she has to like release this energy that she's picking up, so she will like draw things, write things. She's also, as a way of coping with this, has like been able to contact her sister Shirley like telekinetically to kind of like soothe herself. So she is able to like connect to people's minds. Is this making sense so far? Because it is a lot at the beginning of this story. This is like all explained, and it's like a kind of a lot to take on. But something really tragic happens to the family, and they go to move to this little island to kind of get away. They'll be like off the grid, and it's this community called Halcyon. And it's a very small community, maybe like 25 people living there. And it was all started by this woman who they call Mother Moon. And Mother Moon has this sort of secret obsession. She doesn't really share it with all the members of the community, just kind of like her the close-knit circle of people in this community. And she's obsessed with traveling to this, oh man, I don't even know how to explain it. It's like a place she's gone inside her mind, and she's called it the Glam Moon. So she is kind of obsessed with being able to connect Glam Moon with like the real world, with reality. She is obsessed with like creating a pathway so that she can go just to Glam Moon whenever, because when she's gone before, it's been in the wake of like some really messed up shit that's happened to her. And man, I don't want to give too much away, so I think that's where I will stop. This book is it's really complex and very interesting, and there are some parts that were downright chilling, like gave me goosebumps and kind of made me a little anxious even. I think Mother Moon is one of my favorite characters I've read in a book in a while, and I think Rio Yours really just, I don't know, this was effective. It made me think, and it was kind of unlike anything I've ever read before. I don't know, you guys, I really think you should read this book. This isn't one that I rated 5 stars, but I definitely don't think it's a book that any of you should like not read, because it's so strange and complicated, and I don't know, these characters were so good, and this weird like telekinetic thing that Edith can do is so interesting, and Mother Moon and her obsession with finding Glam Moon is so weird, and you guys should just read this. It's so strange. It's so interesting. All right, so the last book I'd like to tell you about is Within These Walls by Anya Alborn. This is about a man named Lucas who is kind of a has-been true crime writer. He has a teenage daughter named V, and he's recently split up with his wife. So he's recently split up with his wife. His life is kind of in shambles. It's like up in the air. He's not really sure what to do. he comes across this opportunity to interview a kind of Charles Manson-like man named Jeffrey Halcombe. And he takes the opportunity. But Jeffrey has like a stipulation in their agreement, and that is that Lucas and his daughter have to live in the house that him and his followers lived in. Lucas is a little bit apprehensive. It's kind of a weird request, but he doesn't know, like, why not? Why shouldn't I do this? If that's what it's going to take to have this guy talk to me, then I'm going to do it. So he moves across country with his teenage daughter to this kind of rural house in Washington where Jeffrey Halcombe and his followers lived. Lucas is writing this story. He's kind of having some issues with his daughter, who's obviously not very happy about being there. As a teenager, obviously, moving away from your friends in the summer is like not gonna be fun. So he is dealing with, trying to get an interview from Jeffrey Halcombe. He is kind of sorting through some information he has. He's able to find like pictures and strange things like that. And it's starting to kind of affect him and his daughter. They're both starting to see strange things like around their house. And as Lucas is like getting deeper into this story, more stuff's happening. Part of the story is also told from a past perspective of one of the followers of Jeffrey Halcombe. It's told by a young woman who's renamed Avis when she becomes part of the group, and she's kind of was reclusive before, definitely closed off to people, and that's what made her vulnerable to joining up this group of people who on the outside seemed very loving and caring and close and together. And that perspective is really interesting. Like I said, this story is really kind of reminiscent of Charlie Manson and his followers. It's really interesting. This is really well written. It's by Anya Alborn, and if you've read over some of her things, you'll know that she is just really great at writing very chilling scenes. And there's one I want to read to you because I think it's like one of my favorite passages I've read in a book, maybe ever. Probably not my number one favorite, but I'm not sure if I could pick a number one favorite anyways, but it's one that has stuck with me since I read this. But instead of seeing herself, she opened her eyes to a girl staring back at her, a person that most definitely was not V. The girl in the reflection was pale, with hair blonde like V's, except stick straight rather than curly. She wore an old, stretched-out sweater, and she would have been pretty had she not rolled her eyes into the back of her head. V opened her mouth to yell, but she couldn't catch her breath to produce any sound. The girl moved. Her mouth began to open, wide, wider, so wide that it turned half her face into a gaping hole, her teeth glinting in that shadowed maw. V mimicked the girl's expression, unable to fight against the thudding of her pulse. Was she imitating the girl because they were the same person? What if, by some trick, the girl took her place while V got stuck in the mirror somehow? Impossible thoughts spiraled through her brain. She wanted to yell for her dad or Uncle Mark. Suddenly, the dull gray of the girl's sweater began to bloom with something dark. Blood began to soak into the soft, misty-colored yarn, creeping across the fabric like a slow-moving disease. A voice in V's head screamed, "Look away!" She was imagining things had to be, but she couldn't bring herself to tear her gaze from the mirror. Fighting against temporary paralysis, V's throat clicked dryly as she struggled for air. The whites of the girl's eyes now rolled forward, snapped into place. V found herself staring at a person who couldn't possibly exist. Chewing on the air, V struggled for sound, any sound, a scream or a mew, anything to assure that the girl in the mirror hadn't somehow taken over her body and that they were two separate entities in a single feasible moment. The girl seemed to mimic V's silent gasping with that wide-open mouth. A baby's disembodied cry slithered from the mirror girl's throat. Vi finally managed to twist away in a panic, the feeling of her feet slipping out from beneath her momentarily derailing her horror. Her palms skipped down the tile wall, scrambling for purchase. That was when she inhaled and finally screamed. So, like, Anya Alborn can write some really creepy shit. As you can probably tell, I really liked this book and I would definitely recommend it. I would recommend all 4 of these that I've talked about. There isn't a bad one of the bunch. Maybe one that I liked less than the others, but it definitely wasn't bad by any means. So that is the end of this video. I feel like I'm a little bit rusty today. So if I seem like disjointed or kind of scatterbrained, super duper sorry. I don't know what's up with me today. That's the end of this video though. As always, let me know if you've read any of these. Let me know if there are other tropes that you find interesting, because I have like a master list and I'm always adding to that. Let me know if there's any other books about fictional cults that you've read and enjoyed. I thought about including Little Heaven by Nick Cutter, because that's another really great one about a fictional cult. There's a character in there that's very Jim Jones-esque, except for like tiny instead of like tall, and I really liked that character in that book because it the kind of like cartoonishness of him really contrasted nicely with the horror of what was going on. So maybe someday I'll do another episode on fictional cults if I ever find some more things to talk about, and maybe Little Heaven will be included in that. Anyways, that's all I have for you today. Thank you once again so much for watching. Thank you so much, everyone. I have exceeded 300 subscribers just, I think, at maybe the beginning of this month. I don't know. It's been a couple weeks at least since that happened. But I just want to thank you all again so much. Thanks for watching, and thanks for being my friend, and thanks for all your recommendations and all your comments, all your kind thoughts, and thank you. Just thank you. I will see you guys later, okay? Okay, goodbye.